Meet Billy Sunday. Billy represented himself as an old-time preacher and always identified his methods and beliefs as old-fashioned. And what did he mean by old-time religion? He would say we must lift ourselves from the boom-boom, whoopee-jazz, bootleg and joyriding current of the post-war generation, the faithlessness of our children, and the drunkenness of our fathers. The remedy is preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, evangelistic work, rebuild the family altar, greater care of the young. He was determined to see the conversion and rededication of backslidden Christians, and he never minced his words in so. Before we get into the story of Billy Sunday, perhaps I should prepare you for what may be said. You could say that Billy specialized in most was just saying it like it was. Here are a few quotes that I find particularly interesting. For some one-liners that will make you catch your breath, just Google Billy Sunday quotes and you'll find what you're looking for. One reason sin flourishes is it's treated like a cream puff instead of a rattlesnake. Going to church doesn't make you a Christian any more than standing in your garage makes you a car. The reason you don't like the Bible, you old sinner, is because it knows all about you. Temptation is the devil looking through the keyhole. Yielding is opening the door and inviting him in. And my personal favorite, if you have no joy, there's a leak in your Christianity somewhere. Knowing a little bit about how he preached, you might make the assumption that he grew up in church and had strong opinions because of it. But Billy's story is much different than that. His story has a rags to riches ring to it. Billy Sunday was born near Ames, Iowa, to William and Mary Jane Sunday on November 19, 1862. His father was a bricklayer who enlisted in the Iowa 23rd Volunteer Infantry on August 14, 1862. He died 4 months after enlisting to pneumonia while at an army camp in Patterson, Missouri. This was only 5 weeks after the birth of his youngest son, William Billy Ashley Sunday. Mrs. Sunday tried to provide for her children, but when it became apparent she would not be able to provide for them for another winter, Billy and his brother were sent to the Soldiers' Orphans Home the government had set up in Glenwood. When the orphanage closed a year later, he was forced to move to Davenport, Iowa, some 300 miles away. When Billy's brother Ed was too old to stay at the orphanage in Davenport, the boys caught the train and returned home. They spent only a few days with their mother and then carried on to Nevada, Iowa, seeking work. Billy's first job was as a janitor in a school in Nevada. He carried in the coal, maintained the fires each day, and cleaned at the conclusion of the day. At 14, Sunday went to work for Governor Colonel John Stott as a farmhand. The Stotts were good to him and allowed him to attend Nevada High School. Sunday's life took a turn when the aunt of Adrian Cap Anson, a Marshalltown native and future Hall of Famer, raved about Sunday's athletic ability and skill in baseball. Cap Anson investigated her claim, and with his recommendation, Billy signed with A.G. Spalding, president of the defending National League champions, the Chicago White Stockings, in 1883. Billy was later sold to the Pittsburgh Alleghenies. It is said that he was an exciting but inconsistent fielder. He is remembered for his notoriously thrilling catches featuring long sprints and athletic dives. Sunday was best known as an exciting base runner and was regarded by his peers as one of the fastest in the game, even though he never placed better than third in the National League in stolen bases. It was during his time in Chicago that his life began to take an unexpected course change. One Sunday, Billy and his teammates were enjoying themselves in the town when they stopped to listen to the gospel preaching team from the Pacific Garden Mission. Billy was attracted by the hymns he remembered his mother singing and began attending the services at the mission. He soon became a Christian, and as Billy put it, he staggered out of sin and into the arms of the Savior. He decided to attend the fashionable Jefferson Park Presbyterian Church, where he was later introduced to Amelia Nell Thompson, daughter of the owner of one of Chicago's largest dairy product businesses. Although Nell was in a serious relationship when they met, Billy sought to gain her affections, and the couple was married on September 5, 1888. On several occasions, Sunday said, "She was Presbyterian, so I'm a Presbyterian. Had she been Catholic, I would have been Catholic, because I was hot on the trail of Nell." In March 1891, Sunday requested and was granted a release from his contract with the Philadelphia Ball Club, bringing his time in baseball to a conclusion. We will never know what Sunday's baseball career could have been because in 1891 he turned down a baseball contract for $3,500 per year to accept a position at the YMCA in Chicago for $83 a month. Essentially, he gave up the rowdy and itinerant lifestyle of a professional baseball player, not to mention the salary of $500 to $1,000 a month, to become an assistant secretary for the Chicago YMCA. Sunday's newfound faith altered the course of his life, and for 3 years he visited the sick, prayed with the troubled, counseled the suicidal, and visited saloons to invite patrons to evangelistic meetings. Sunday got his feet wet in revivalism in 1894 when he was hired as the advance man for John Wilbur Chapman, who at the time was considered Dwight L. Moody's successor. His task was to arrive at a town in advance, overseeing the organizing committees and renting the hall. If a hall was not available, he would set up a large meeting tent. Billy led the singing for Chapman and counseled those who came forward at the conclusion of the service. For 2.5 years, Billy honed his skills in the revival movement under the leadership of Dr. Chapman. Sunday began his own meetings in tiny Garner, Iowa, when Chapman unexpectedly returned to the pastorate in 1896. For 12 years, Sunday preached in approximately 70 communities, most of them in Iowa and Illinois. He referred to these towns as the kerosene circuit because most of them were not yet electrified. Drawn by both the speaker and the message, Sunday's following grew as the meetings grew, and so did Sunday's organization. Fred Fisher joined him in 1900 as his full-time song leader and advance man, much like Sunday had been for Dr. Chapman. Much like Chapman, Billy often preached from tents where they were set up in advance of his arrival. In the background is playing Bright in the Corner Where You Are, which is said to have been a theme song in Billy Sunday's tabernacle. He was the first major evangelist in American church history who truly incorporated his professional athletic career into his evangelism, and he truly did incorporate his athleticism into his sermons. It's said that Sunday's body was like an extension of his sermons. No posture is too extreme for this restless gymnast, yet it all seems natural. Like his speech, and it's an integral part of the man. Every muscle of his body preaches in accordance with his voice. It was also said, one cannot escape at least mentioning other methods Sunday used to communicate his message. These were his rapid-fire, slangly rhetoric and acrobatics, governed by the consideration that good language communication must include a gamut of current usage. Sunday's language was often replete with slangy terms, earthy metaphors, and often heart-trending illustrations. Charging contemporary preaching with grammatical daintiness, the evangelist declared, if the English language gets in my way, it's got to suffer. That's all. After a snowstorm destroyed the tent in Salito, Colorado in 1906, Sunday vowed he would never again use a tent in his campaigns. From that vow came what is known as one of his famous trademarks, the Billy Sunday Tabernacles. They started small, but future tabernacles grew to hold up to 20,000 people and were referred to by the press as glory barns. Sawdust was spread on the aisles to keep the dust down, to muffle the noise of feet, and to serve as a fire retardant. Billy began to challenge people to hit the sawdust trail. Over Billy's lifetime, an immense number of people hit the sawdust trail, while the usual total given for those who came forward at an invitation is an even 1 million. One modern historian estimates the true figure to be close to 1.25 million. In 1908, the Sundays entrusted their children to a nanny so Nell could manage the revival campaigns. Mackie writes, Nell Sunday transformed her husband's out-of-the-back-of-the-pocket organization into a nationally renowned phenomenon, and by New York campaign of 1917, the Sundays had a paid staff of 26. Under Nell Sunday's direction, the ministry grew to be incredibly multifaceted, seeking to not only hold meetings that urbanites could come to, but instead to reach into the very worlds people lived in, from the business world to Bible study classes held throughout the city. Between 1906 and 1918, Billy Sunday held revivals in 10 of the 15 largest cities in the United States, and in more than 1/3 of the cities which had over 100,000 inhabitants. While his ministry seemed to be a glaring success, his family life was marred with tragedy. In 1930, their housekeeper and nanny, who had become a virtual member of the family, died. Then the Sunday's only daughter, the only child raised by Nell, died of what seemed to be multiple sclerosis in 1932. While Billy was a prolific speaker against the dangers of alcohol, devastation hit hard when his oldest son George began drinking heavily when he left home. He later fell to his death from a 7th-floor apartment. The Sunday's son Paul moved to California as a test pilot but was killed when the plane crashed into a hill outside Burbank. And Billy Jr. was killed instantly when he was speeding away from an all-night party in Palm Springs. Presbyterian Billy Sunday was decidedly less than a confessional Presbyterian. It's said that although he was ordained by the Presbyterian minister as a Presbyterian minister in 1903 by the Chicago Presbytery of Presbyterian churches in the United States, the ordination examination was highly irregular. At times, Sunday would respond to a question by saying he would have to pass, or that the question was just too deep for him. Sunday admitted his lack of theological knowledge and would state that he knew about as much of theology as a monkey does of a ping pong. And he stated that he graduated from the University of Poverty and Hard Knocks. He was essentially a conservative evangelical who believed and preached fundamental doctrines of the inerrancy of Scripture, the virgin birth of Christ, the doctrine of substitutionary atonement, the bodily resurrection of Christ, a literal devil and hell, and the imminent return of Jesus Christ. Billy Sunday's message was for everyone, which was indicated by the broad audience he gathered. The cards left at the conclusion of service indicated denominational preference, which were in order from highest number down: Methodist, Presbyterian, Baptist, Christian, Congregational, Evangelical, Lutheran, Episcopal, Catholic, and all other denominations. The turn of the century was an era of professionalism. Christian organizations experimented with ways to apply professionalism to ministry and evangelism. Sunday and his team were part of the push towards this. Especially after 1912, they viewed themselves as experts in the craft. Although in 1910 he disdained the term professional evangelist, by 1913 he embraced and even promoted the idea that an evangelist is a specialist. In 1917, the New York Times wrote, "Sunday's team is a picture of a remarkable religious organization, one which follows the most modern business methods in organization, subdivision of labor, and the employment of experts for carefully outlined fields, the development and extension of personal contact with the ideal object of reaching every man, woman, and child in New York City, and above all, an appreciation and practical utilization of the importance of advertising." At what could be considered the peak of his evangelistic career, he could attract crowds of 20,000 people twice or 3 times a day and sustain these levels for 8 to 10 weeks. In fact, the revival held in Philadelphia in 1914 included temporary headquarters which housed 75 clerks and incessant ringing telephones, including 15,000 volunteers who fanned neighborhoods with advertising, partnered with local pastors to enroll 20,000 new members in men's Bible classes, and included a 3,600 voice choir, training up to 1,500 men and women as personal workers for those who walked the Sawdust Trail. Billy's life had a great impact indeed. He preached an old message in a new form. While he claimed to be old-fashioned, his style was not. It had been said that no preacher before or since has commanded so much media attention and celebrity status as did Billy Sunday. His preaching was indeed memorable. In Elijah Brown's biography of Billy Sunday, he writes, "He pulls off the lid so that you can almost feel the fire and smell the smoke and hear the gnashing of teeth in hell." Some have suggested that his preaching bordered somewhere between prayerful sincerity and mechanical indoctrination. Indeed, Billy added the role of entertainer and celebrity to the repertoire of skills attributed to the evangelist. He maintained a live, interested audience by his chair-breaking, running, jumping, and other physical contortions. Sunday's preaching included not only his words, but his whole body, in clearly making a point that would not be forgotten. He magnified the trend in evangelism to include a component of entertainment. His ministry created a way for revivalism to boldly reach an age of mass production and consumption. Almost sarcastically, Wired writes, in an era of mass production, it meant standardizing revival methods to make outpourings of the Holy Spirit scientific, reproducible, and even guaranteed. In other words, it meant producing revivals like a product for mass consumption. It's imperative to note 2 things that differentiate Sunday's team from those who've gone before him. First, his team was distinctly and intentionally interdenominational. And secondly, it had a great number of women in leadership. This stands in contrast to other corporate methods that were emphasizing male leadership. While Billy Sunday sought to change religious practices, his broader objective was to change society. Billy Sunday's methods brought revivalism into the 20th century by bridging the new corporate methods for division of labor and strategic planning with the gospel message. Billy Sunday was the bridge between D.L. Moody and Billy Graham. Charles Finley organized revivalism, Moody tied it to businessmen, and Billy Sunday made it corporate, systematic, and even scientific. Wired suggests that Sunday's revival stood at an important nexus of religion and culture, and both American evangelicalism and popular culture were changed after contact. Billy Sunday was the humanist preacher in the world and sought to use language that everyday people used. He would say, "I've eaten Armour's and Swift's hams. Yes, I have chewed Wrigley's gum, and I have purchased an electric toaster from Western Electric and a house screen from Sears and Roebuck. I know you all." However, not everyone loved Billy Sunday's style. He was accused in 2 editorials of the Sunday Watchman as being a showman with an empty bag on one hand, and on the other hand, a spiritual doctor who was able to diagnose but could not prescribe a lasting remedy. Billy Sunday did not shy away from the muddy waters of politics. He was an early advocate of rights for minorities, women's suffrage, and labor laws. He also cast his lot for prohibition and became the most ardent and influential evangelist proponent of prohibition. His famous sermon may well be the booze sermon, which he preached on many occasions. He would state that whiskey is all right in its place, but it belongs in hell. Community leaders often scheduled campaigns and votes around this issue when he was in town. The harder liquor forces fought, the more intently he would call men to climb on the water wagon. Billy Sunday was also rather outspoken with his opinions towards immigrants. In a highly patriotic sermon, he declared that alien immigrants should Americanize or be deported. He used the term Americanize to refer to coming back to God, the Christ and the Bible of the forefathers, which essentially means he used the term Americanize synonymously with Christianize. He declared at one point that radicals should be lined up and shot, as deportation was too easy a punishment and would be too costly for a nation. He also challenged young men to enlist. Billy Sunday was unafraid of changing gender roles. At the turn of the century, while sermons for men only had been somewhat common, he preached to women-only audiences as well. It's said that his men's-only sermons focused on the masculine vice and intemperance, and it was in his women's sermons that he was particularly demonstrated his ability as a showman. With Ma at his side, he denounced divorce, birth control, abortion, marrying for money, and not the least, the evils of ballroom dance. He specifically called out women who attempted to evade the burden of motherhood. His message for women was not as fundamental as one might expect. With his leadership roles he allowed women to step into leadership in many capacities. What Sunday dismissed about the changing roles of women was that this liberation was used for self-indulgence and morally questioned activities. Although he advocated muscular Christianity and decried feminized Victorian Protestantism, Sunday welcomed women in leadership in ministry. On Wednesday, November 6, 1935, Billy suffered a fatal heart attack only a week after he preached his last sermon on the text, "What Must I Do to Be Saved?" He was 73 and had spoken in person to over 85 million people. His body was laid in Forest Park Cemetery in Chicago and is marked by a 10-foot granite stone with the picture of an open Bible and 2 Timothy 4:7 inscribed on it. The story of Billy Sunday is much like some of our favorite Bible characters, when God uses unlikely candidates to do great things. George Marsden writes of Sunday that God, by striking straight blows with a crooked stick, did indeed bless the revivalist's efforts. While I find myself drawn to the story as he moved from the orphanage to the ball field to the pulpit, I equally find myself shocked at some of his word choices and opinions. The quote here seems a fitting way to conclude this presentation. Stopping at third adds no more to the score than striking out. It doesn't matter how well you start if you fail to finish. And indeed, Billy Sunday finished well.